The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 44. Fiend, Fyre, and Photographs. Linda held the golden badger cup carefully as the three women stood in a small circle with Remus in the back garden of the Little Lupin cottage. "Right," said Tonks firmly. "Fiend fire is notoriously difficult to control, so we're going to need to attack this together." She looked pointedly at Narcissa and at Remus, who had joined the three women in the garden soon after they'd arrived. "What can I do?" Linda asked. "Stay back," said Narcissa, Tonks, and Remus. "Just be ready to chuck that thing into the fire when we say so," Tonks reminded her. Narcissa set to work creating a strong shield charm, whilst Remus focused on maintaining a steady stasis charm. Once they'd indicated that they were ready, Tonks cast the Fiend Fire spell. Instantly, tongues of fire began licking up the walls of Narcissa's shield charm, and the older witch pushed back with everything she had. "Now, Linda!" Tonks yelled, already trying to douse the Fiend Fire flames as they threatened to escape. But Linda was suddenly frozen to the spot, racked by self-doubt. The cup, made evil by the introduction of the Horcrux, seemed to now sense its impending doom. As soon as the flames were conjured, the unassuming golden goblet had her doubting everything she thought she knew about her friends, her loved ones, and their loyalties to her. Were Narcissa and Richard having an affair? They could be, she thought. Would Richard have ever told her the truth about his role in military intelligence if she hadn't confronted him? Did he have other secrets that he hadn't told her? Did Hermione truly love them as much as she would have if they had been her biological parents? Would she ever measure up to Heathcliff and Octavia's standards? "Linda, you have to do it now! Throw the cup into the flames!" Tonks screamed. By this time all four of them were sweating from the barely contained diabolical fire. Remus's stasis charm was holding, but he was growing as weary as Narcissa. With an effort, Linda shut down the voices in her head firmly. She girded her resolve and aimed carefully, lobbing the golden cup directly into the center mass of the flames. There was a sound like screaming, like anguish. And then suddenly 2 more spells united with the 3 that were combating the fire. Andromeda's shield charm joined and strengthened her sisters, and Kingsley began vanishing as much of the fire as he could, alongside Tonks. With the added backup, Remus was able to help with the vanishing, and within a minute the Fiend Fire had shrunk to a tiny speck, which then blinked out of existence. The 6 of them stood, looking dazedly at each other. "Thanks for coming when you did," Tonks said weakly. "Nymphadora, Valpusilla, Tonks, Lupin, what the hell were you thinking, conjuring Fiend Fire?" Andromeda began, shaking like a leaf. "Is it enough to say that it's a very long story?" asked Tonks, stumbling to a chair on the lanai and dropping into it. "Don't get me wrong, Sissy and I probably got up to far worse in our day," Andromeda said, turning with a timid but conspiring smile to her sister. "Sissy, not that I'm not happy to see you here, but can someone explain exactly what's going on here?" Bellatrix turned away from the flu call, quaking in fear. Her vault at Gringotts, the most sacred, most secure of places, the last bastion and testament of her blood purity and standing within the wizarding community, had been violated. The thieves had impersonated Bellatrix, her husband Rodolphus, and her sister Narcissa. They had gotten away, according to her useless husband Rodolphus, with only a worthless, tarnished cup barely worth mentioning. All of the valuable items had gone untouched. "A cup?" she asked fearfully. "What kind of cup?" "The goblin just said it was gold, and had two handles. Had a little animal emblazoned on the front. Sounds like some useless flotsam that Rab probably picked up on holiday in France," Rodolphus said distractedly, clearly in a hurry to get back to whatever floozy he'd managed to coerce into entering his bed recently. Bellatrix gathered her voice. "I'm going to need you to come here to Malfoy Manor and report this to the Dark Lord." "Why? What's he got to do with this sodding cup?" Rodolphus asked distrustfully. The irate witch leaned forward, so that her nose nearly touched her husband's, hovering in the fire. As she spoke, her spittle flew onto the grate below and sizzled. "Just trust me. He needs to know, and you're just the messenger to tell him," Bellatrix said with a sinister grin. She had no idea what the cup was for. Long before there had been drinking straws and moronic cousins and inane elixirs, there had been this stupid cup, another ridiculous obsession for the Dark Lord. He'd asked her to hide it, to keep it safe. Apparently she had failed. What did it matter, really? There were thousands of cups out there, millions even. But like his precious straw now, her lord had been protective of the cup, so she'd hidden it for him. But Bellatrix was no fool. She knew the Dark Lord's ire was likely to lash out at whomever told him about this cup, and she didn't want to be in the room when it happened. The three women that had jokingly called themselves the Charlie's Angels gave enough of the story as to the purpose of their trip to Gringotts to satisfy the curiosities of Lupin, Kingsley, and Andromeda. "I should be getting back to the manor. If there's any fallout from this, it'll likely happen soon," Narcissa said regretfully. "Andromeda, I don't have time to say everything I want to now, but I do want to tell you that I'm sorry for everything. I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but can we meet again soon?" Andromeda hugged her sister. "Of course, and believe it or not, I do understand. You were in a tough position, and I didn't reach out to you either. I didn't want to make it more difficult for you, and I regret that." The sisters embraced once more, and Narcissa disapparated back to Malfoy Manor. When she got there, it was clear immediately that all hell had broken loose. "Now what?" asked Linda. "Are there more of these, whatever this thing was? Will we have to do this again?" The two women were alone with Kingsley and Lupin. Andromeda had gone back into the house to check on baby Teddy. "I don't know," Tonks answered honestly. "I suppose it all depends upon whether or not the goblins alert you-know-who." But the answer came almost instantly, in the form of a message from Harry Potter. "He knows. Last one is in Hogwarts. Ron and I are going to try to get in and destroy it." Tonks looked up, turning her phone to show the others. "It's happening," said Kingsley sagely. "The Dark Lord will not allow Potter to leave the school. There's going to be a battle, and it's likely going to happen tonight. Message Narcissa, and ask her how things are there." Linda did so. Narcissa's answer came back. 999. Tonks looked up swiftly at Linda. "The Muggle emergency number? Did you teach her that, in case things went pear-shaped. Linda nodded. I realized wizards don't use emergency services, but it seemed prudent to have some kind of code in place. Right, said Lupin. We need to contact the Order. Those that don't already know. Patronuses? Kingsley nodded. Everyone will need to apparate directly into Aberforth's pub. That's where I'm told the passage to the school is. Please inform Potter first, before he hurries off half-cocked and alerts some snatchers. Tonks nodded and called Harry to tell him where to go. And when you get into Hogwarts, please let Hermione and Draco know our status. She just texted me to say that classes were cancelled, and the group is meeting in the room of requirement. Tonks hung up the mobile and turned to Linda. Ready to go? Go? Where? To Hogwarts, of course. Linda took a deep breath. Right, then, I'm ready. Oh, wait, my medical bag. Can we stop by my house? She asked the younger witch anxiously. Tonks nodded. They left Kingsley to send patronuses to various members of the Order of the Phoenix, and hurried inside to bid Andromeda and baby Teddy goodbye. Watching the small family, Linda had to look down and wipe away her tears. Seeing the young mother kissing her child goodbye was heartbreaking, knowing where they were about to go. It was difficult to imagine having to say goodbye to such a precious baby. Linda herself had had to bid goodbye to not only the dream of carrying a child, but also to her own young daughter, each year at platform 9 3/4. There were few things in life more difficult, she knew, than saying goodbye to a child. But Tonks drew in a deep breath, hugged and kissed her husband fiercely, then took Linda's arm. She turned on the spot, with Linda's arm in hers. Destination, Hampstead. When they arrived at the front gate, Linda saw a flash of platinum blonde hair through the window. Get behind the neighbour's hedge, she whispered frantically to Tonks. I think Lucius is here. Don't go in, the young witch hissed quickly, holding tight to Linda's arm. It's all right. He thinks I'm on their side, according to Richard. I can do this. We've got to hurry. If he's already here, that means they're assembling, and they'll be at the school soon as well. Holy Helga, this is such a shit idea, Tonks moaned to herself, seeing as Linda had already stepped inside the gate and was rushing to the front door. Linda was greeted almost immediately by Lucius, who did not seem surprised to see her. Ah, Lady Linda, I'm certain you are preparing for the fight as well, Lucius said with a small bow in her direction. Indeed I am, Lucius. I trust everything is ready, she said in a confident manner. I believe so. The giants have agreed to allow us to apparate them into Hogsmeade, though they insist upon bringing their instruments. There is no actual Yeti, of course, but I'm hoping in the melee of the battle the Dark Lord will not notice. I should think not, Linda said, making a mental note to ask Richard what the hell all of this was about, giants and Yetis, once everything was finished. If everything was finished, and they were both still around to tell the tale. Well, I'd only stopped by for my supplies, Linda said briskly, crossing the room and finding her medical bag in the coat closet. Lucius frowned. You aren't coming with us? No. I have my own contacts, my own way in. I typically work on a smaller scale. In the shadows, you know. Lucius was reminded of Richard's words all those years ago. Linda is the real smooth operator when it comes to extractions. She's much smaller than me. She can get into tighter spaces easier. She can do an extraction before anyone even realizes it's happening to them. She's very gentle about it. I can never finesse it so well. Linda's a real professional, very skilled." He shivered a bit from the memory. "Yes, indeed. Well, it only makes sense." Linda withdrew her mobile phone and tapped in a quick message. "Right, I should go. Perhaps I'll see you, but probably not." Linda gave one last wink to Lucius and hurried back to the door as the wizard returned to the living room. At that moment, Richard was coming up the stairs from the cellar, an inconspicuous backpack slung over his shoulder, pocketing his mobile phone from which he'd been reading. Linda rushed to him, throwing her arms around him quickly and pushing him into the coat closet. He drew the door closed swiftly behind them and pulled the short chain to turn on the overhead light. "My God, I was afraid I wouldn't see you before I had to leave. Here, this is what you need," she whispered, reaching into her bag and withdrawing a small packet. She thrusted it into his hand, and he took it gratefully and pocketed it. "It's just enough to mess things up a bit. Hopefully it will work, and she knows what to do," Linda said cheerfully. "I'm sure they'll be useful, Lindy Hop. Hermione should be there when you go in. They're gathering. Keep her safe, please. Both of you, stay safe. Keep to the inner part of the building, and stay with someone capable. McGonagall, Dumbledore, Tonks," Richard said in a low voice, taking in a ragged breath. "I should be telling you that, Richard," Linda said, a tear escaping her eye, which she wiped quickly. "Well, unfortunately, I'm stuck with Lucius," Richard said with a wry grin, and they both laughed in spite of the dire situation. He kissed her deeply, then, drawing her into his arms and rubbing small circles on her back. "Well, try and keep him safe, then. I'd feel terrible for Narcissa and Draco if anything happened to him. You too," she smiled up at him. "After all, he's been your doubles tennis partner for years." "Yes, one of these days we'll manage to win a match," he said ruefully. "Hopefully not tonight, though," she said. "Indeed," Richard agreed. They stepped out of the coat closet, and after one final kiss, Linda hurried out the door. She stepped quickly up the walk, turning left and jogging to the end of the street. She rounded the corner, spotting Tonks pacing the sidewalk. Linda rushed to her. At her quick nod, without a word, Tonks took her by the arm and disapparated them to the Hogshead Inn. Richard hurried into the living room and met Lucius, who was lost in thought, looking at the photos on the mantel. His eyes skimmed over photographs of Hermione's birthdays and holidays past, of Octavia and Heathcliff, whitewater rafting in Turkey, of Richard's mom and dad, his father wearing his service dress uniform, each of them holding young toddler Richard's hand at a military cemetery on a beach somewhere in France, of Linda and Richard on their honeymoon in Tenerife. Richard looked over the other man's shoulder at the photos. He felt like a part of himself was saying goodbye, just in case. He knew his odds of returning home were not great, but as he looked at the photos, he knew they reflected a life well lived. He had that, at least. That and his family. Lucius appeared lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. "In the wizarding world, we're taught that muggles are dirty, dangerous. They're not like us. But I must say, Richard, I've come to respect you greatly in the last few years we've known each other. Sometimes I feel as though you were forced into this fight, you know? It wasn't your fight. Not really. But you have chosen it, just as assuredly as it chose you." Richard wasn't sure what to say. He had seldom heard Lucius speaking so lucidly. After a moment he replied, "I suppose that's true. But regardless of how I came to be here, there is something important to me involved in this fight. My family is part of this, so I'm a part of this." Lucius nodded somberly. "Your cousin," he murmured. "No," Richard said emphatically. He pointed to the photo of Hermione the day she turned 10, her wild dog-ear ponytails flying behind her as she and Linda sped by on a carnival ride. Their hands were in the air, matching smiles on their faces, both looking at the next drop that was to come. Richard had snapped at the photo, and it was one of his very favourites. "No," he said again, picking up the framed photo and turning it to Lucius. "This is the family I'm fighting for. You need to decide which family you're fighting for as well, Lucius." The blonde wizard was silent, considering. Richard resettled his bag on his shoulder and returned the frame to the mantel. "Ready?" Lucius only nodded, and took out the little bag of flue powder from his robe pocket. "Malfoy Manor," he said roughly. The two of them stepped together through the flames and into the chaos on the other side. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great78.